Hey everyone, thanks for being here today at Come Follow Me Live. We're really excited to have Dan Duckworth with us today. He's the founder of the Crucible of Life, and he recently did a podcast with leading saints just a couple weeks ago, and I was really excited when I heard that podcast because I'm a Sunday school president in the Riverview Ward down in Spanish Fork, and there was a lot of really exciting topics and ideas that were presented during that podcast that honestly, if they were implemented, they would completely transform the way that teachers interacted with their students and hopefully transform the students into better people. And so I'm really excited to be here with Dan to talk with him about those ideas, and hopefully there's something that I can take away from this to implement in my own Sunday school presidency. So Dan, thank you very much for being here.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, James. Thanks for reaching out. I think before you jump in, I just want to say, I think it's important for everyone to recognize that this isn't a training, right? I don't represent the church. I'm not teaching you guys how to teach, right? It's not an official communication. This is like you and I are neighbors, we're friends, even though we haven't met. We met through a mutual friend, Mark Carey, right, who runs the Come Follow Me group. And so this is like us just having a conversation, and we decided to record it so that all these people could watch it too. So that's kind of the context that people should take this in.
Cool. That's a great way to look at it. I really appreciate that. So I've got a set of questions for you. Hope you don't mind. First question I have for you is, when I was first called as a Sunday school president, of course, I dove right into the training, learning all about the calling. And in the handbook, it mentions a lot about teaching the Savior's way. You know, it refers people to that manual a lot, just about every paragraph. And so with that heavy emphasis on teaching the Savior's way, how does the work and language you do around transformational teaching fit into that prescribed pattern of teaching in the Savior's way?
That's a great question. Thanks, James. I think that, so folks won't have a lot of the background because, you listen to the podcast with leading saints, Kurt Frankum. And so people should go listen to that if they're interested in this subject, right? What I was really sharing in that was a little bit about my own experiences as a professional teacher. Right. So I'm someone who teaches managers and executives. Right now, I'm launching an online community for, what I call change makers, or for leaders. And really, I've been exploring and learning, like, how do you have authentic online communities, right? Because to me, that's an oxymoron, or was an oxymoron. And authentic, like, online is where you go to be inauthentic, to be fake, to be, right? All these things, right? That we're just posturing all the time in the Facebook world or whatever else it is, okay? And so for me, it's been a journey of how do you create an authentic community that is rich enough and real enough that it could inspire transformation. Because what I know in my professional work is, absent that community, it's almost impossible, right? It's almost impossible to lead someone through character change. So that's the context, right, of where we're coming from. So now the question is, how does the manual, how does this fit in? How does the things I was talking about fit into, the manual of teaching the Savior's way? Well, I've been thinking about this a little bit this week. And I think the first question that every teacher has to ask herself is, what am I teaching for? What is the outcome I want? Like, what's the end game? What's the result that I want? And in my business, in my industry, which is leadership teaching, I can tell you that 95% of those who host leadership programs, they are working towards an improvement in skills or knowledge. Okay. Now, there's a few of us that have a different purpose, and we're teaching for character change. Okay. Now, being a skilled leader and being a knowledgeable leader are important. That's great. That's wonderful. It helps you. But character is really fundamentally the defining factor about your performance as a leader, like who you are. And by the way, so let me just define what character is. Character is what you do when you're not thinking about it. Okay. It's what you do when you're not thinking about it. So we call it your mental model. Okay. So if someone steps on your toe, in that split second, you don't have time to think, what's the appropriate response, right? If I was going to be Christ-like, what would I do? No. If someone steps on your toe and you scream or you swear or you punch that person or you just smile and say, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it. All of that is a reflection of your character. It's who you are. It's what you do when you're not thinking about it. And that is built into you through your life experiences, right? through your life experiences, you learned that when your toe gets stepped on, there's a certain response that keeps you safe or that gets you what you want or whatever, in response to that situation. So that's character change. Very different than teaching for knowledge transfer, right? I've got wisdom, I've got ideas, I want those to get in your head, versus teaching for skill development, which is I want you to be able to perform a task better than you can perform it today, right? So those are kind of three high level. There's other things too, but those are kind of the three main ones, right? So if I were to think about that in the church context, which I'm a Sunday school teacher right now, I teach the 16 and 17-year-olds, which by the way is my dream calling, so I love it. But in the church context, you got to ask yourself that same question. Like, what am I teaching for? Is it skill development? Is it knowledge transfer, or is it character change? Okay, I can't answer that question for you. You got to answer that for yourself. Okay, now I can give you my ideas, my opinion as a member of the church and as a Sunday school teacher. When I go, I've got Teaching the Savior's Way pulled up here. It says the goal, very first paragraph, first page, first paragraph. It says the goal of every teacher, every parent, every called teacher, it says home teacher, but we would call that ministering brother, ministering sister, and every follower of Christ. The goal is to teach pure doctrine of the gospel by the Spirit in order to, okay, so now what we've just done, anytime you throw in the in order to or because of or therefore or wherefore, right, you've just separated the goal from the strategy. Okay, what comes first is the strategy, what comes second is the goal. So teach the doctrine of Jesus of Christ by the Spirit in order to help God's children build their faith in the Savior and become more like him. That to me, build your faith. Faith is a principle of action and of power. It's what you do, right? So that to me is a reflection of your character and your behavior. And to become more like him, right? Become more like Jesus Christ. That's about changing your character. Now, in the church context, the word we would use very frequently to talk about character change is conversion, right? When you change fundamentally, some fundamental aspect of who you are, you change that mental model, your default operating pattern, right? That's conversion. That's changing your character. Okay. So now with that backstage, now we take you to your question. I think how does what I'm talking about have to do with the Teaching the Savior's Way manual? I think that we get these manuals and these trainings that come down from the brethren and from the leaders of the church, and we read them through a lens. Okay. We have our life experiences, which is our character, and we put those life experiences on, and then we read this manual. Okay. Now, if you've been through 30 or 40 or 50 years worth of classes in the church that were oriented towards knowledge transfer, which most of our classes are, they're oriented towards knowledge transfer. And then you put this on, and it doesn't really matter what this says. If you put this on and then you read this manual with your lens of your personal experience on, you're pulling out everything that reinforces what you already believe and what you already think and what you already know. Okay. So what I would say, James, is the most important thing that a teacher in the church could do, any teacher, anywhere, parent, family, home, business, wherever you're teaching, is to know why you're teaching. What is it you're going for? Is it skill development? There's a time for that. Is it knowledge transfer? There's a time for that. Is it character change and behavior change? And if it's the latter, then you need to go to the Teaching the Savior's Way manual with your character change glasses on and say, what does this manual teach me about how to teach for character change? And that will mean more for the people who've watched the Leading Saints podcast as well. So there's a thought on that question for you.
I love it. That's perfect. And, that fits exactly in with what our theme for the year has been. It's been to help everyone in the ward become passionate about Come Follow Me and about studying the gospel in their home. Because with this crazy COVID thing happening and with all of our meetings, being separated, having to come from home, it's really up to the people in the ward to study on their own. And so whatever we could do as a Sunday school presidency, I want to try to encourage that and make people passionate about study so they would do it in their own home, And so on that note, how do you see the role of the Sunday school presidency fitting in with what you were talking about, the character development, the change?
So I think that's a great question, because I just listened to you talking about what your hopes and dreams are as a Sunday school president and kind of some of the things you've been doing in a very strange year. And I think that's great. I think that I just heard you. I'm like, wow, that's that you want to talk about passion. Like, I feel your passion as you're talking. Okay. So let me ask you a question in response before I go into that.
Mhm.
You said that the conversation that I had with Kurt was intriguing or helpful in some way. Like, what was it about that resonated with you? Like, what did you take from that caused you to want to have this conversation right now?
Well, there were certain things that you talked about that I instinctively was wanting to do. And the thing that was interesting about your podcast is you turned it into a system and a process, and you had already like figured out how to tactically implement all these things. You gave them a language, which took them from the abstract to a concrete thing that you could actually do. And the thing that you just talked about putting on the lens of knowledge transfer, I have been telling my teachers that it's not about communicating just the doctrine. It's about motivating, right? Like, you said it much better than I've been saying it, but and so as a result, the kind of teachers I've been looking for are people who are like coaches, right? Who know how to transform youth through athletics. And I want them to take those same skills and implement them with our Sunday school classes as well. And so just about everything you said resonated me to some extent. And the fact that you have it down to a process, I think that's phenomenal.
So I think we should be fair and say that if you go back and listen to that podcast again, you'll notice that I don't have it down to a process. I experienced a few things in a learning journey that I was super excited to talk about, and just like this, like Kurt is my friend. I was going to call him and have this conversation anyway. And we were like, well, why don't we record it and make it into a podcast episode, right? Because these are just things that I'm learning. Like I'm not an expert. Now, if I have any expertise, it's in a professional domain, right? So I'm not an expert in even the church domain. And some of the things I talked about in that episode was, hey, I'm getting to learn and experiment as a Sunday school teacher. And Zoom is actually giving me a reason to be more conscientious, right? Instead of just showing up and saying like, oh yeah, I know how to teach. It's giving me a reason to say, do I know how to teach? Or am I dependent on a certain context, a certain structure, a certain framework, a certain culture, right? To be able to accomplish the results that I want. Okay. Now you said teach the doctrine, and it's more than teaching the doctrine. It's so important to me that I see teach the pure doctrine by the Spirit. Those are strategies, right? Those are what God has given us in order to influence his children. Okay. And so we don't ever need to stray from that, but we can ask ourselves the question, how do we do that? Okay. If we have one set of experiences that influence the way we see the world, we think there's only one way to teach the doctrine by the Spirit. I think it's been about 6 or 7 years now that the brethren and the general authorities came out, and they were really pushing really hard for us to change the way we teach in the church. Okay. I promise you that if we were to do a research study, they have been telling us to teach the doctrine by the Spirit for at least the last 150 years. Okay. Or 200 years, whatever it is since the church has been started. I promise you. So those words are not different words, but there's something that the brethren are saying to us and have been for at least the last 6 or 7 years, maybe longer. But that's when I became really conscious of it, right? And that's when Come Follow Me for Youth was coming out and things like that, right? And they were saying, we need you to show up differently. Now, in my stake, which at the time was the Ann Arbor stake, they had a little phrase that they would use. And they would say, it's not about being the sage on the stage, it's about being the guide on the side. Okay? So I like that little rhyme because I can use that. Am I being a sage on the stage right now? Because being the sage on the stage has way more to do with our own ego than we often realize. Okay? And it's not just ego because I'm trying to puff myself up, but it's ego because it keeps me safe and it's a comfortable zone to be in. And I can walk away and feel like I did a good job, right? As long as I got through the materials, I did a good job. And fundamentally, that's what we all need from a psychological perspective. We need to walk away from for some people it's difficult. For other people, it's not as difficult, but we need to walk away from a situation like teaching a class where we're exposed and we want to walk away and feel like, hey, I did a good job. Okay. So now your question is about the role of the Sunday school president. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. So I observed a Sunday school teacher who was an amazing Sunday school teacher in terms of his ability to talk and testify and to teach and to recite. And you could sit in his class and be fully absorbed for an hour or 45 minutes, whatever it is, right? And you would walk away and you say, wow, I feel well fed. Now, I watched for an entire year as this amazing teacher, someone who would win awards, right, in the previous paradigm. I watched for a year as he worked through the process of changing from being a sage on the stage to becoming a guide on the side. Okay. It was a struggle. Now, nobody in the room knew that. Okay. But because I'm a teacher professionally, and I really care about this, I was intensely interested. So I was watching the development, the evolution of this teacher, and it was fantastic to watch. Okay. And he became a great, fantastic guy on the side. Okay. Now, at the same time, I've also been in a situation where I've seen a Sunday school teacher called, and this being a Sunday school teacher in front of 50 people was way beyond her tolerance for comfort and right. That wasn't her gig. Okay. And so she was like a fish out of water, and every week was just torture. And you could tell it had been torture for 2 weeks. The entire time she had been preparing and planning and praying. And if you were to come to her and say, you need to love your class more, because that's what it says in teaching the gospel the Savior's way, or you need to prepare more, or you need to be in the scriptures more, or you need to ask more questions, right? None of that. So if the Sunday school president had come to her, none of that would have meant anything. Okay. Because when you are under duress, character is absolutely in control of your behavior. It's what you do when you're not thinking about it, right? So the teacher who is a skilled, highly talented speaker will stand up there under duress, and they will just speak, and it will be great, right? And everybody will give them high marks. The teacher who is not a skilled and developed public speaker will stand up there and squirm and fidget and struggle and cry and whatever it is, right? And she doesn't know what she's doing. Neither of them. So that's my point, is in that situation, neither of these teachers, the great teacher and the struggling teacher, they're not really conscious of what they're doing. They're just locked in, and they're just getting through the experience, and their character is guiding them through. This is what you need to do to stay safe. Okay. In both situations, as a Sunday school president or whoever is interested in helping these people, right? Because you have all kinds, this is my point. You have all kinds of teachers that you're working with. Okay. And you cannot approach them individually like they are the same. They all have different life experiences. Okay. So the question is, how do you, now this is what's interesting to me, James, as a teacher, if my goal is character change, as a teacher, how do my goal is I have to change the way the students show up. Okay. And this is what we talked about mostly on the other podcast. I have to change the way they show up. They have to engage in different learner behaviors than what is the typical standard expected way to show up to a Sunday school class. Okay. So almost most of my energy is trying to get them to show up differently. Okay. Well, now if you take a step back and somebody needs to help me change as a teacher, okay, they have to help me show up differently. Okay. How is Dan Duckworth going to show up differently than he normally shows up in his Sunday school class? Because the key is you can't get someone else to show up differently until you show up differently. Okay. But what does that mean for the Sunday school presidency? You can't get the teacher to show up differently until you show up differently. Okay. And then you're starting to think, so I'm going to pull up something here. So at the end of the teacher's manual, it says, a personal evaluation about how to improve as a Christ-like teacher. Okay. So this is just to underscore that teaching is character-based. Okay. If I read through this list, these are amazing things. Number one, I pray for those I teach. So I get to evaluate, is this true or false of me, right? I pray for those I teach. If I have an activity-based lens on, I'm now asking myself, oh, okay, let me make a checklist. I can, okay, how many times a week do I pray for this? I'm going to create a list. I'm going to do, right? A character-based question would be, is it spontaneous and natural for me to pray for those I teach? The answer for me personally, for Dan Duckworth, is no. So even in getting ready for this interview with you, I read that and I went, oh, I don't pray for those I teach unless I am very, very consciously self-regulating that. What would it mean for me to become the kind of person who spontaneously and naturally is praying for those that I teach? Ooh, how would I show up differently to class if that's the kind of person I was? Okay, I'll give you another one. I reach out to those who are not attending class. Okay, so we as a Sunday school presidency, we can say like, hey, we want to create an expectation that if you have people that aren't there, we want you to go visit them or call them, right? We're going to give you a task. We're going to give you an assignment. It's all that's skill-based, activity-based, okay? That's very different than helping someone become the kind of person who very easily, naturally, and spontaneously reaches out to the people who don't show up in class. You know those people. I know those people. And they rock. And you're just like, wow, like it's so easy for them. It's so hard for me. And if you ask me to do this, President Meyer, I'm going to actually resent you because you're asking me to do something that's hard, right? But if you help me open up and go through character change, then I'm going to become the kind of person who finds that very natural and easy, right? So I would just say to the role of the Sunday school presidency, I don't know. I've never been in the Sunday school presidency, right? I work with managers and executives all the time. This is the same exact stuff that we are working with them on all the time, right? You can coerce your people. You can set expectations. You can increase accountability. You can do all that stuff. And they might do it. They might do the work, but ultimately they will resent you. You know this with your kids, right?
Yeah.
So for me, leadership, the definition of leadership is no different than the definition of teaching. It's how do I get people to do what they would otherwise not do in order to accomplish what they would otherwise not accomplish. Okay. So how do I get them to learn the doctrine of Jesus Christ in a way they would never learn it without my intervention, in order that they might develop a level of faith and a degree of Christ-like attributes that they would never develop unless they did that thing. Okay, so that's the question. How do I get them to show up? As a Sunday school president, it's how do I get my teachers to show up as different people, to be going on a character change journey?
That's awesome. And the first checklist item that you read, referring to those you teach, from our perspective, those we teach are the Sunday school teachers.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it translates perfectly to what you're saying, to what we're doing. The other thing, too, that I'm taking away from this is really, I think the underlying key here is putting on those different lenses. Because if we read through that manual of Teaching the Savior's Way, the entire thing with the lens of character change, I think that right there is the key, and that will answer so many of our questions. So
it changes everything, right? It doesn't change the words, right? We're not going off writing our own manual, but the way we read it, and we go, this is the way you should read it, okay? Because if your own experiences have locked you in, it's hard to do this. But this is the way you should read it. You should imagine how passionate Elder Holland is when he talks about teaching and the way he wants to see teaching changed in the church. Just imagine how passionate he is. And then ask yourself, when Elder Holland reads the words in this manual, how does he read them? What does he take out of this? What does he imagine a teacher or a Sunday school president doing differently than they do today, right? Because he sees something in these words that go way beyond. Like, I promise you, a lot of these words are very, 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 very similar to all the manuals that existed before the big push on teaching, the change in teaching, right? So the words haven't changed much, but the brethren want us to read them differently, right? And I can't do that for you. I'm just giving you my perspective on this. That's the Spirit that will do that for you. And that's why you have Sunday school presidents to help be a mentor and a guide on the side as you go through this manual and you say, how should I be reading this, right? The goal of any character change teaching setting is to create what I call, what I don't call it this, but the science calls cognitive dissonance, okay? And what that really is just a sense of, I'm opening my soul that there might be another way to see the world. There might be another way to see myself. There might be another way to see this class and this experience, right? And that feeling of opening is scary, but guess what? You open your heart, and that's when the Spirit comes in and teaches you what you specifically, James Meyer, Sunday school president, or Dan Duckworth, Sunday school teacher, what you specifically need to do to implement these words in this book.
Right on. So now let's take that lens, and we've just applied it to Teaching the Savior's Way. Now let's apply it to teacher council meetings. Because I was speaking with one of our teachers this week and asking him about teacher council meetings, and he says when they go well, they're great. But when they go poorly, they can be kind of a pain. And so really what the teachers get out of teacher councils meetings is all about how we as a presidency are leading them and conducting them. So what would be your ideal teacher council meeting under this framework?
That's a great question. So I have a little bit of an interesting perspective on this, James, because I lived in the stake where teacher council meetings, at least maybe there was multiple places where this bubbled up, but this was a stake where teacher council became a thing before it was a thing. Okay.
Mhm.
And I also lived in an RV trailer with my family for a year, and we drove all around the US and went basically to a different church every week, I think. So probably like 30 or 40 different churches we went to. I mean, all Latter-day Saint wards and branches, right? And every time, this is actually right when the teacher council meetings were kind of a buzz, and it was still like a monthly, or like they were having multiple meetings a month or whatever. So we could show up, and every week there would be a teacher council meeting going on. And guess where I would choose to go? Because I'm a teacher, right? And I'm like insanely interested in this question of how do you do transformational teaching?
Right.
Okay. And what is board count or teacher councils, and how are they being implemented? So I actually got to go through and observe informally at least 20 different teacher councils happening. Okay. I think one lens that I can give to our listeners here is the word council. There must be a reason why the church decided to call this a teacher council instead of a teacher training, or instead of a teacher development meeting. It's a teacher council. Okay. Now, what does this word council mean? It means to deliberate. Okay. You can't deliberate on something unless there is an unknown. All right. So a council is by definition a group of people that deliberate on a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Okay. Now, how does this apply to a teacher council setting? Because the manual here is actually very explicit, right? We don't have a lot of explicit, this is exactly how your meeting should run kind of things. It's very explicit. And they say you should do a third on this and a third on this and a third on this, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But what I want to do is say, I have watched people do those thirds, and they struggle, right? It's clear that the person leading the meeting is struggling to know why we're doing this and what we're supposed to be getting out of this. And what they're really doing the entire time is fighting their character and culture. Okay. There's two forces really at work here. They're fighting their own character and culture that say there's a normal, safe, expected, predictable way that we do these kind of things in the church. But clearly this is supposed to be different. Okay. And what I would say is, if you can keep in mind the nature of the word counsel, it will completely change how you engage in these three activities. Okay? So if activity number one is to come and share about different things and experiences you've had, right? Activity number two is to discuss a principle. And activity number three is to have a role play, have a practice. Okay. If you're there to deliberate on a question with an unknown or a difficult answer. Now a council isn't necessarily a decision-making body. Okay. But it should be a deliberative body. Okay. What is it that we're there to debate? What is unknown? What's open-ended? Okay. In a council setting, I would hope, I mean, maybe there's doctrinal questions I'm not sure about, my testimony, or those kind of things that could come up. But generally speaking, the teachers of the church generally are going to be people who are pretty solid in terms of their doctrinal understanding and their commitment to the church, right? So what is their unknown? Because the doctrine it's pretty clear. Okay. And through the Come Follow Me manual, like, we're making it very simple, very clear, right? There's not a lot of room for debate or discussion. So at that level, if you're staying at that level, there's no counsel. All there is reinforcing. Okay. All there is stating what you already believe, stating what we already know. Okay. And personally, this is my personal opinion, having a group of people sit in a room and tell each other what they already all know, there's some value in that, but like, it isn't transformational value. Okay. So if what we want is transformational value, if we want culture change, which is the equivalent of character change at the sociological level, okay, if what we want is culture change, then we have to show up differently. All right. Now, what is unknown about teaching and about the doctrines and about the methods is how to apply that in your life, okay, or into a specific situation. The doctrine is plain, even the principles are plain, but the application is sometimes very unclear. Okay, so it says here in the manual that I'm supposed to love everybody I teach. But man, there is this one student in my class who is so annoying and takes up all the time and says rude comments to me and tells me afterwards that I'm a terrible teacher. And now How do I apply that in my life? That, James, would be a phenomenal, deliberative council discussion for a teacher council to discuss, what does this mean in the real world that we are living in? Let's stop being plastic people and let's get together and talk about the real world, because it's a struggle. It is a struggle to get everybody to class, especially. Now, here's a great thing, right? A great thing to discuss. How can you do Zoom church effectively? Like, I can't think of a better topic for a teacher council to be discussing. Like, take some of these principles in this book and say, how do we do this in today's world? Here's one that I brought up to our elders quorum president this week. I said, have you noticed that we have this really big, strong board, right? I said, have you noticed that I'm the youngest guy that shows up to elders quorum on most weeks? And he goes, well, kind of, like, tell me more. And I said, well, I'm 40. Okay. And there's only a handful of 40-year-olds in their 40s. And then in the 50s and 60s, mostly 60-year-olds, right? And then there's some 70s and 80s. I said, have you noticed that? So that would be a great thing to counsel about. Why is that? Because he asked me, so why do you think that is? Now we're having a council, right? We're taking these principles and we're saying, what does this mean in our real live situation right now? So I would just give you, as a suggestion, just as a friend, I would say explore that idea of the council. Go back to the trainings about what a teacher council is, right? And explore and re-look at them all from the perspective of, how can we talk and deliberate about questions that are unknown? Why? Because as individuals and as a collective, that's the process of opening, right? Sherry Dew says, will you engage in the wrestle, right? As a teacher council leader, I'm asking myself, how do I get this group to collectively engage in the wrestle? As a Sunday school president, I'm asking my teachers, ask myself, how do I get my teachers to engage in the wrestle? And as a teacher, I'm asking myself, how do I get my students to engage in the wrestle? The number one answer is to engage in the wrestle yourself.
And I'm glad you brought that up. This brings up a point that brought up on your podcast that I listened to earlier. And that is, in order to have these type of conversations and ask these type of questions, and in order for people to actually break out of their current way of thinking, you have to create an environment where people feel safe, right? So you've got to be vulnerable yourself, and you have to foster a sense of community within this group. And, after having talked with you, it's much more clear to me that the Sunday School Presidency as well needs to foster that same collective, safe environment or community with the teachers, where it's almost a part of their identity. Like someone talking to them like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. Who are you? I'm a Sunday school teacher from the Riverview ward, like,
oh, interesting.
Because it's such a tight community that's like what they think of.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. And let me add one more thing back on the role of a Sunday school president. If you're really going to get your teachers to change in dramatic ways, it's going to be character change. It's not going to be skills or knowledge based. Okay. They need a guide on the side. They need a mentor. They need a friend. Like, nobody goes through that productively. They don't go through character change productively unless they have confidants. Right. So what would it mean for a teacher to be highly conscientious of her teaching in front of a room and know that there are things that she's working on, and then know that as soon as the meeting is over, she gets to go shoulder to shoulder with her Sunday school presidency member and just talk about, like, hey, what'd you think? Like, how did it go? Like, what were you trying to accomplish? Like, what were the signs? What were the signals? Like, tell me what your body was doing. Like, was it perspiring? Was it fidgeting? Like, was it confident? Like, and as you talk through all that stuff, right? And just to know that somebody is there who cares and who has a vested interest in her growth and achievement as an individual, right? If you are ever perceived as a leader as someone who's judgmental and who is manipulative or is using somebody to further their own goals, including your own ego, right? So if they sense that you're someone who just, hey, I need you to change so that I can go to the bishop and say the teacher's changed, right? The second they sense that, they will shut off and they'll say, you're somebody that I can't be real with, okay? Yeah. So when you become real to them, then they will open up and they'll become real with you. And now you are in a position to change their lives. Talk about teaching the Savior's way, right? Mm-hmm. That's the Savior's way. The Savior's way is to get them to open up because he loves them so much that he can correct them and guide them and counsel them, right? That's massive.
The Savior was always doing things that broke the expected norm or train of thought of that society. So I think that's super important. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I have a lot of things to think about, and I think it's going to be a fun adventure to implement all these things in our ward.
Okay, so reach back out if you have any questions or if you stumble on anything, okay?
You bet. You bet.
Okay. Nice to meet you, James.
Good to meet you too, Dan. Appreciate it. So as we wrap this up, we have one more announcement from the producer of the show, Mark Harry. Mark?
Thank you both. James, you are my Sunday school presidency. I am in your presidency. I learned a lot today, and I hope this interview, it's a little longer than the normal ones we usually have on Come Follow Me Live, but it was worth every minute of it. All the show notes of Dan, if you want to interact with Dan, founder of Crucible Life, you can see those in the description. And also the podcast that Dan did with Kurt Frankham. And Dan, I want to thank you. Is there anything else you want to cover of what maybe you might maybe want to talk a little bit about what you didn't say, or do you think you covered it all?
No, I think we're pretty good. The last thing I would say, Mark, is just do something different. Do something different.
That's good. Well, thank you again for both of you. And for those who are still remaining and listening, we have a Come Follow Me Live later on with Kurt Frankham, the same person who did the interview with Dan. So again, if you need to listen to that interview with Dan and Kurt, please, it's at leadingsaints.org. And later on today at 7 o'clock, we're going to have an interview with Kurt Frankham, and we're going to be talking about what is a testimony and Moroni 10, because that's kind of what Come Follow Me is still about. We're wrapping up the Book of Mormon. But I hope to do these kinds of interviews in the future, and hopefully, Dan, we might be able to get you back. That would be really great.
Loved it. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Well, thanks again, and good night for everyone, or good afternoon, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.